A Navy admiral is rushed into emergency, bleeding and furious. He refuses treatment from anyone beneath his rank. But when a quiet nurse steps forward and describes his injuries with impossible precision, the room goes silent. Who is she, and how does she know what only a battlefield surgeon would recognize? From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories of hidden strength, consider subscribing. What she says next will stop him cold. Dawn broke cold over Naval Station Coronado. The fog had not yet lifted from the bay when the helicopter rotors began their rhythmic cut through the gray morning air. On the deck of the new aircraft carrier under construction, Admiral Cassian Hargrove walked with the deliberate stride of a man who had commanded ships, squadrons, and the respect of thousands. His dress whites were immaculate. His posture was rigid. His expectations were absolute. The inspection had been scheduled for weeks. Contractors stood at attention as Hargrove moved through the skeleton of steel and scaffolding, his eyes scanning every weld, every joint, every surface that would one day carry sailors into waters unknown. He asked sharp questions. He pointed out flaws that others had missed. He did not tolerate mediocrity, and everyone in his presence knew it. The scaffolding gave no warning. One moment, Hargrove was examining a structural beam on the third level. The next, the platform beneath him shuddered. Metal groaned. Bolts that should have held did not. The entire section tilted, and before anyone could shout a warning, a steel beam swung loose from its moorings and caught him across the torso with the full weight of industrial construction. He hit the deck hard. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Pain exploded through his ribs and abdomen. Blood began to seep through the white fabric of his uniform, spreading in dark, irregular patterns. Around him, men scrambled. Radios crackled. Someone screamed for a medic. Hargrove tried to sit up and found he could not. His vision blurred at the edges, but his voice did not fail him. "Patch me through to Coronado Naval Hospital. I want Dr. Castellanos waiting." "Only Castellanos." The words came through gritted teeth. His hand pressed against his side. When he pulled it away, his palm was slick with red. The helicopter was already inbound. The roar of the rotors grew louder. Hands lifted him onto a stretcher. He pushed one of them away, furious at the indignity of being carried. But his body betrayed him. The pain was sharper now, spreading like fire through his core. He lay back, staring up at the sky, and let them load him into the aircraft. As the helicopter banked toward the hospital, Hargrove's vision swam. He touched his side again. More blood. Too much blood. For the first time in decades, something close to fear flickered across his face. The helipad at Coronado Naval Hospital was already alive with activity when the aircraft touched down. The trauma team had assembled in formation, ready to receive him. Nurses checked equipment. Doctors reviewed protocols. Everyone moved with precision, but there was tension in the air. This was not just another patient. This was an admiral, a man whose decisions shaped careers and whose displeasure could end them. The gurney was pulled from the helicopter and rushed through the double doors into the trauma bay. Hargrove remained conscious, his eyes sharp despite the pain. Blood had soaked through the temporary dressings applied in the field. His uniform was ruined, his breathing was shallow, but his voice carried authority even now. "Where is Dr. Castellanos? I was told he would be here." Dr. Lior Fenn, a young attending surgeon with less than 5 years of experience, stepped forward. His hands were steady, but his expression betrayed his nerves. He had been briefed on who was coming. He knew what was at stake. "Sir, Dr. Castellanos is finishing another surgery. He will be here in approximately 15 minutes. In the meantime, we need to assess your injuries and stabilize you." Hargrove turned his head sharply, his gaze locking onto Fenn. "Then get him out of that surgery, now. I do not want residents practicing on me." The words hit like a slap. Fenn froze. Around him, the rest of the team exchanged glances. No one moved to contradict the admiral. No one dared. A nurse standing near the vitals monitor reached for the phone to page Castellanos again. Another nurse stepped back, her hands hovering uselessly over the supply cart. The room, which moments before had been a model of efficiency, now felt paralyzed. In the corner of the trauma bay, near the triage station, a figure moved with quiet purpose. Embry Calix had been assigned to triage that morning, a rotation she had not requested but accepted without comment. She wore standard scrubs that had seen too many washes, The fabric faded to a soft gray blue. Her dark hair was pulled back into a functional bun. Her face was calm, almost neutral. She did not look at Hargrove directly. Instead, she watched the monitors. She watched the team. She watched the way the blood pooled beneath the gurney. "Why is she here?" one of the younger nurses whispered to another. "She works nights in recovery. This is not her floor." "I do not know. Maybe they needed extra hands." Embry said nothing. She moved to the equipment cart and began organizing supplies with the kind of efficiency that suggested muscle memory. Bandages, IV lines, surgical instruments. Her hands were steady. Her expression did not change, but her eyes never left the monitors. Hargrove groaned as another wave of pain hit. He tried to sit up, and Dr. Fenn moved quickly to press him back down. "Sir, please, you need to remain still. We are trying to help you. I gave you an order. Where is Castellanos?" "He is on his way, sir. But I need to examine you now. Your blood pressure is dropping, and we need to determine the extent of your injuries." Hargrove's hand shot out and gripped Fenn's wrist. The strength in that grip was surprising given his condition. "You will not touch me until Castellanos is in this room. Do you understand?" Fenn pulled his hand back, his face flushing. He looked around the room, searching for support, but found none. The other doctors and nurses stood frozen, caught between medical protocol and the absolute authority of rank. The monitor beeped steadily, but the numbers on the screen were beginning to shift. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing, respiration shallow. From her position at the triage station, Embry's jaw tightened. She did not move forward, not yet. The minutes stretched. Each one felt heavier than the last. Hargrove's anger did not subside, but his energy was clearly waning. His skin had taken on a pale, waxy quality. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The blood seeping through his uniform had slowed. But that was not a good sign. Internal bleeding did not stop because it was no longer visible. Dr. Fenn made another attempt. "Admiral, with all due respect, we need to start IV fluids and run some imaging. If you have internal injuries, waiting could be dangerous." Hargrove's eyes blazed. "I told you not to touch me. If you cannot follow a simple order, then get out. Send someone who can." The room fell silent. Fenn stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. Around him, the rest of the team looked at one another, unsure of what to do. A junior resident near the door quietly exited, unwilling to be part of what was unfolding. Another nurse busied herself with paperwork, her eyes down. Embry continued to organize the triage station. She worked methodically, her movements precise, but anyone watching closely would have noticed the way her gaze kept returning to the monitor, the way her fingers paused over certain instruments, the way she tilted her head slightly, as if calculating something. A phone rang. One of the nurses answered, listened, then hung up with a soft click. She turned to Dr. Fenn. "Castellanos says he needs another 10 minutes. There is a complication in his current case." Fenn closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose. He turned back to Hargrove. "Sir, Dr. Castellanos is unavoidably delayed. I strongly recommend we begin treatment now. Your condition is deteriorating." Hargrove did not respond immediately. His breathing had become labored. His hand, still pressed against his side, trembled slightly, but his voice, when it came, was as hard as steel. "Then I will wait. 10 minutes will not kill me." From across the room, Embry's eyes flicked to the monitor again. The numbers told a different story. She set down the supplies she had been holding and took a single step forward. Then she stopped, waiting, watching. The team stood in uneasy silence. No one knew what to do. The Admiral had refused treatment. Protocol demanded they respect his wishes, but protocol also demanded they save his life. The two imperatives were in direct conflict, and the room was caught in the middle. Hargrove's head lolled to the side. His eyes fluttered. For a moment, it seemed he might lose consciousness. Then he jerked awake, sucking in a sharp breath. His hand slipped from his side, and blood smeared across the white sheets of the gurney. That was when the monitor alarm began to scream. The sound cut through the room like a blade. Everyone's attention snapped to the screen. Blood pressure had dropped below 70 systolic. Heart rate had spiked above 120. The numbers were flashing red. Dr. Fenn moved immediately, his training overriding his fear. He reached for Hargrove's wrist to check his pulse manually. The Admiral's skin was cold and clammy. "We need to intubate. We need to get him to imaging. We need to move now." But even as he spoke, Fenn hesitated. Hargrove was still conscious, still aware, and he was still glaring at anyone who came too close. His authority had not diminished, even as his body failed him. The paralysis in the room deepened. Embry stepped forward. She did not run. She did not shout. She simply walked to the side of the gurney and placed one hand on the metal rail. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear. "Admiral, I need you to listen to me." Hargrove turned his head slowly. His eyes were glazed with pain, but they focused on her with effort. "Who are you?" "My name is Embry Calix. I am one of the nurses assigned to this unit. Then you should know your place. Step back." Embry did not move. "I will. But first, you need to understand something. If we wait for Dr. Castellanos, you will not survive the next 10 minutes. The room went still. Dr. Fenn stared at her, his mouth open. The other nurses froze. Hargrove's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What did you just say to me?" Embry's gaze did not waver. "You are bleeding internally. Your blood pressure is dropping because you have lost significant volume. You likely have a splenic rupture, possibly a liver, laceration. If we do not intervene now, your organs will begin to shut down. You will go into shock. And you will die." Hargrove's face darkened. "You are a nurse. You do not make that diagnosis." "I am not making a diagnosis. I am telling you what I see. And what I see is that you have maybe 8 minutes left." Dr. Fenn found his voice. "Nurse Calix, please. This is not appropriate." Embry ignored him. She kept her eyes on Hargrove. "Admiral, you are used to being in command. I understand that. But right now, your body is giving orders that you cannot override. You can wait for Dr. Castellanos if you want, but you will not be conscious when he arrives." Hargrove tried to sit up again. Pain lanced through him, and he fell back with a gasp. His breathing was rapid and shallow. His hand clutched at the sheets. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. "How do you know this? How do you know what is wrong with me?" Embry's expression remained neutral. "Because I have seen it before. Many times." The monitor alarm continued to wail. Dr. Fenn looked between Embry and Hargrove, clearly out of his depth. The rest of the team stood motionless, waiting to see what would happen next. Hargrove stared at Embry. His vision was fading at the edges, but he forced himself to focus. There was something in her voice, something in the way she spoke. It was not the tone of a nurse offering comfort. It was the tone of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. "You said your name was Calix." "Yes, Calix. That name. I have heard that name before." Embry did not respond. She simply watched him, her hand still resting on the gurney rail. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, even as his strength ebbed. "Where have I heard that name?" Before Embry could answer, another spasm of pain hit. Hargrove cried out, his body arching off the gurney. The monitor alarms escalated. His blood pressure had dropped below 60. Dr. Fenn reached for the crash cart, his hands shaking. "We are losing him. We need to act now." Embry turned to him. "Then, give me authorization to stabilize him." Fenn stared at her. "What? You are a nurse. You cannot perform a surgical procedure. I am not asking to perform surgery. I am asking to stabilize him, so he does not code before Castellanos gets here. Can you authorize that?" Fenn hesitated. His mouth opened and closed. The legal ramifications, the chain of command, the protocols, all of it swirled in his head. But the monitor was screaming, and Hargrove was dying, and there was no time left. "Yes, do it." Embry moved immediately. She turned to the nearest nurse. 2 units of O negative now. Start a second IV line. Prep for rapid transfusion. She looked at another nurse. "Get me a portable ultrasound. I need to confirm the source of the bleed." The team moved. The paralysis broke. Equipment was wheeled into position. IV lines were inserted. Blood bags were hung. Embry's hands moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who had been standing. Quietly in the corner, moments before, she placed the ultrasound probe on Hargrove's abdomen, her eyes fixed on the screen. There, she pointed, fluid in the peritoneal cavity. Splenic injury confirmed. Possible liver involvement. Dr. Fenn leaned over to look at the screen. "How did you know where to look?" Embry did not answer. She was already moving to the next step. "We need to get his pressure up before we move him. Push another liter of saline? Prep for possible intubation? Hargrove's eyes fluttered open. His voice was weak, barely audible over the alarms. You are not just a nurse. Are you? Embry glanced down at him. Her expression softened, just slightly. Right now, Admiral, I am whatever you need me to be. His hand reached out, trembling, and caught her wrist. Tell me, who are you? Embry met his gaze. There was something in her eyes now, something old and tired and far away. But she did not answer. She gently pulled her wrist free and returned to the monitors. The door to the trauma bay burst open. Dr. Castellanos strode in, his surgical cap still on, his gloves stained. He took in the scene in an instant, the monitors, the blood, the team working around the gurney, and Embry standing at the head of the bed, directing the entire operation. He stopped. His face went pale. Embry! She looked up. Her expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition. Maybe regret. Hello, Dr. Castellanos. Castellanos moved closer, his gaze sweeping over the setup. What are you doing here? I thought you. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Embry stepped back slightly, making room for him. He was critical. We did not have time to wait. Castellanos looked at the monitors, at the IV lines, at the ultrasound still displaying the image of Hargrove's abdomen. His expression shifted from shock to something else. Understanding. He turned to Dr. Fenn. Who stabilized him? Fenn nodded toward Embry. She did. Castellanos studied Embry's face for a long moment, then he turned to the team. Prep him for surgery. We are taking him to the OR immediately. As the team began moving the gurney, Hargrove's hand shot out again. This time, it caught Embry's sleeve. His grip was weak, but insistent. Wait. She paused. Yes, Admiral. Hargrove's eyes were barely open, but his voice was clear. You were military. Were you not? Embry said nothing. The silence stretched. Around them, the team continued to work, but everyone was listening now, waiting for her answer. Finally, Embry spoke, so her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Yes, I was. Hargrove's grip loosened. His hand fell back to the gurney. And you know what is wrong with me, because you have done this before. Embry looked down at him. Her face was unreadable. Many times. The gurney began to move. Hargrove was wheeled toward the OR, his eyes still on Embry. She stood in the center of the trauma bay, her hands at her sides, blood on her sleeves. Dr. Castellanos paused at the doors and looked back at her. We need to talk. After. Embry nodded once, then the doors closed and she was alone. The room fell silent. The alarms had stopped. The chaos had passed. The other nurses and doctors began cleaning up, moving quietly, avoiding eye contact with Embry. No one spoke to her, no one asked questions, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Who is she? And how did a nurse just take command of a trauma bay like a battlefield surgeon? Embry walked back to the triage station. She picked up the supplies she had set down earlier and resumed organizing them. Her hands were steady, her face was calm, but her eyes were distant, focused on something no one else could see. From across the room, Soraya, another nurse who had worked with Embry for 3 years, approached slowly. She stopped a few feet away, hesitant. Embry, that was. I have never seen you do that before. Embry did not look up. I have never needed to before. Soraya crossed her arms. You sounded like a doctor, like a surgeon. Embry continued organizing. I was helping. That was more than helping. That was? She paused, searching for the right word. That was command. Embry finally looked up. Her expression was tired. Soraya, I need to finish this inventory. Can we talk later? Soraya opened her mouth to press further, then thought better of it. She nodded and walked away, casting one last glance over her shoulder. Embry returned to her work, but her hands, which had been so steady moments before, now trembled slightly. She set down the supplies and pressed her palms flat against the table, breathing slowly. In, out, in, out. On the wall above the triage station, a clock ticked steadily. The morning shift was only 2 hours old. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift from the bay. The sun was rising over Coronado, indifferent to the lives saved or lost within the hospital walls. Embry closed her eyes. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember. The desert, the heat, the sound of helicopters, the blood that never seemed to stop, the faces of the soldiers she had saved, and the faces of the ones she had not. She opened her eyes. The memory faded. She was here, now, in a quiet hospital in California, working as a nurse, living a life she had chosen, even if no one understood why. But for the first time in years, that life felt unstable. Hargrove had recognized something in her. Castellanos knew who she was. The secret she had kept so carefully, the identity she had walked away from, was beginning to surface, and she did not know if she was ready for what came next. The door to the trauma bay opened. Dr. Fenn entered, his face drawn. He walked over to Embry and stopped, his hands in his pockets. "Calix, I owe you an apology, and a thank you. You saved his life." Embry shook her head. "You would have figured it out. You were doing fine." Fenn gave a bitter laugh. "I was paralyzed. He refused treatment, and I did not know what to do. But you just stepped in, like you had done it 1,000 times before." Embry did not respond. Fenn leaned against the table. "Where did you learn to do that? To read a patient like that? To take command like that?" Embry met his eyes. Her voice was soft but firm. "Somewhere else? A long time ago." Fenn waited, hoping she would say more. When she did not, he nodded slowly. "Well, thank you. Seriously." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Calix, I do not know what your story is, but whatever it is, you are wasted in triage." He left. Embry stood alone again. The silence pressed in around her. She looked down at her hands. They were clean now, scrubbed free of blood. But she could still see it, still feel it. The weight of all the lives she had held in these hands. And now, one more. If this story reminded you of someone who carries their strength quietly, someone whose worth is hidden beneath the surface, leave a comment. Share their name. Honor their silence. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe. Not for us, but for them. The operating room had been prepped in under 4 minutes. Hargrove was on the table, his vitals unstable but holding. Dr. Castellanos had scrubbed in and was standing at the head of the surgical field, his hands gloved, his expression unreadable. The anesthesiologist had just finished the intubation. The monitors hummed steadily, tracking every beat of Hargrove's failing heart. Embry had returned to the recovery wing. She walked slowly through the corridors, her shift technically over, but her mind still in that trauma bay. Her hands felt strange, not shaking, but alive in a way they had not been in years. The muscle memory had returned so easily, too easily. She had sworn she would never do that again, never stand over a body with a scalpel in her hand, never make the decision between life and death in the space of seconds. And yet, she had. Soraya caught up with her near the nurse's station. "Embry, wait, please." Embry stopped but did not. "Turn around." Soraya moved in front of her, blocking her path. "You cannot just walk away like nothing happened. You saved the Admiral's life. You took over a trauma bay like you had every right to be there. And then, she gestured helplessly. "You just go back to recovery like it was a normal day." Embry looked at her. It was a normal day. Someone was hurt. "I helped. That is what we do. That is not what you did." Soraya's voice dropped to a whisper. "You did not just help. You diagnosed him. You gave orders to an attending surgeon. You performed an ultrasound and identified internal bleeding in under 2 minutes. That is not nursing, Embry. That is something else." Embry's jaw tightened. She looked away, toward the window at the end of the hall. The fog had lifted completely now. The bay was visible, glittering in the morning sun. It looked peaceful, clean. Nothing like the places she used to work. "I did what was necessary. That is all." Soraya stepped closer. "I have worked with you for 3 years. 3 years. You have never mentioned being in the military. You have never talked about your past. You show up, you do your job, you go home. And now I find out you were. What? A combat medic. A field surgeon." Embry finally met her eyes. "I was someone else. A long time ago." "Who?" Embry shook her head. It does not matter. It does to me. Soraya's voice cracked slightly. We work together. We trust each other. And I just watched you do something I did not even know you were capable of. So yes, it matters. Embry looked down at her hands. They were clean now, scrubbed, but she could still feel the phantom weight of surgical gloves, still see the blood pooling on white sheets, still hear the monitors screaming. I was a trauma surgeon, Naval Medical Corps. I deployed to combat zones. I did my job, and then I came home. That is the whole story. Soraya studied her face. Why did you stop? Embry did not answer. She moved past Soraya and continued down the hall. Soraya called after her, but Embry did not turn back. She walked until she reached the break room, empty at this hour, and closed the door behind her. She sat down at the small table in the corner and pressed her palms flat against the surface. The tremor in her hands had returned, not from fear, from memory. The kind of memory that lived in the body, not the mind. The kind that could not be reasoned with or pushed away. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. The heat was the first thing. Always the heat. Afghanistan in summer was a furnace that never cooled. The forward surgical team had been stationed at a base near Kandahar, operating out of prefabricated structures that shook every time a helicopter landed. The sand got into everything, the equipment, the wounds, the air itself. Embry had been 29 years old, young for a surgeon, but old in the ways that mattered. She had already completed 2 deployments, already performed more trauma surgeries than most civilian surgeons would see in a lifetime, and she was good at it. Better than good. She could work in conditions that would break others, could make decisions in seconds that others took minutes to consider, could save lives that should have been lost. The day she remembered most clearly had started like any other. Morning rounds, equipment checks, the slow, grinding routine of military medicine. And then the convoy had hit the IED. 12 casualties, all at once. The helicopters brought them in waves, and the surgical bay became a symphony of chaos. Blood on every surface, shouting. The smell of burnt flesh and antiseptic. The steady beep of monitors that sometimes flatlined before anyone could reach them. Embry had worked for 18 hours straight that day. She had lost track of how many surgeries she performed, how many limbs she amputated, how many chest tubes she placed, how many times she looked into the eyes of a 19-year-old soldier and promised him he would be okay, knowing she might be lying. She saved 11 of them, 11 out of 12. The 12th had been a young Marine named Corporal Davies, 22 years old, engaged to be married. He had taken shrapnel to the abdomen, and by the time they got him to her table, he had already lost too much blood. She had opened him up and found devastation. Liver lacerated beyond repair, inferior vena cava torn, bowel perforated in multiple places. She had worked on him for 2 hours. She had tried everything, every technique she knew, every desperate measure, but his pressure kept dropping, his heart kept slowing, and finally, it stopped. She had called the time of death at 14:37. Then she had stripped off her gloves, walked out of the surgical bay, and vomited in the sand behind the building. That night, she sat alone in her tent and wrote the letter. To his fiancée, to his parents. The same letter she had written too many times before. She tried to find words that would mean something, words that would soften the unbearable, but there were no such words. There never were. 3 weeks later, her deployment ended. She returned to the States with commendations and medals and a silver star she did not want. She attended the ceremonies, shook the hands, smiled for the photographs, and then she quietly submitted her resignation from surgical practice. Her commanding officer had tried to talk her out of it. "You are one of the best we have, Captain Calix. We need surgeons like you." "I cannot do it anymore," she had said. "I cannot hold their lives in my hands and know that sometimes, no matter what I do, it will not be enough. That is the job. That is medicine. I know. And I cannot do it anymore." So, she had walked away, retrained as a nurse, took a position in recovery where the patients were stable and the decisions were small, where she could help without carrying the weight of life and death every single day, where she could sleep at night without seeing their faces. It had worked. For years it had worked. She had found peace in the quiet, in the routine, in the knowledge that she was still helping, just in a different way. Until this morning. Embry opened her eyes. The break room was still empty. The clock on the wall read 9:43. Somewhere in this building, Hargrove was in surgery. Castellanos was operating on him, and she was sitting here, alone, feeling the weight of a choice she thought she had made years ago. But choices, she was learning, were never as final as they seemed. The door opened. Dr. Fenn entered, looking exhausted. He saw her and stopped. "Oh, Calix. I did not expect to find you here." Embry straightened in her chair. "Is he out of surgery?" "Not yet. Castellanos is still working, but his vitals are stable." Fenn sat down across from her, rubbing his face. "You were right about everything, the spleen, the liver, all of it. Castellanos said if we had waited even 5 more minutes, the Admiral would have coded." Embry said nothing. Fenn leaned forward. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Embry met his gaze, waiting. "How did you know? How did you look at him and just know exactly what was wrong? I have been practicing for 5 years, and I could not make that call with that kind of certainty. But you did it in under a minute, so I need to know. How?" Embry considered her answer carefully. "I have seen it before, many times." "In combat?" "Yes." Fenn nodded slowly. "I looked you up. After. I hope you do not mind. But I needed to understand. Captain Embry Calix, Naval Medical Corps, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, 18 months in Helmand Province, over 47 documented saves in a single deployment." Embry's expression did not change. "You were a legend." Fenn's voice was quiet. "The other surgeons talk about you, about the things you did, the impossible saves, the surgeries you performed under mortar fire, and then you just disappeared. No one knew where you went." Embry looked away. "I went somewhere quiet. Why? Because I was tired." Fenn shook his head. "That is not the whole truth." "Is it?" Embry was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I saved 47. But I lost more than that. And after a while, the ones I lost started to matter more than the ones I saved, so I walked away." Fenn studied her face. "And you have been working as a nurse ever since?" "Yes." "Do you regret it?" Embry thought about the question. "No, I do not. I have helped a lot of people, in smaller ways, quieter ways, and that has been enough. Until today." Embry did not respond. Fenn stood up. "For what it is worth, I think you made the right call. In the trauma bay, you did what I could not. And I am grateful." He paused at the door. "But I also think you are wasting your skills. You could be saving lives every day. Instead, you are checking vitals in recovery." Embry looked at him. "I save lives every day in recovery. They are just different kinds of saves." Fenn nodded and left. The door closed behind him, and Embry was alone again. She sat there for a long time, thinking. About Hargrove, about Davies, about all the others whose names she still remembered, even when she tried to forget. About the weight of a scalpel in her hand and the feeling of a heart restarting under her fingers. She had thought she was done with that life, done with the operating room and the impossible choices and the crushing responsibility. But this morning had proven something she had not wanted to face. She was not done. The skills were still there, the instincts, the ability to see what others missed and act when others hesitated. It had all been waiting, dormant beneath the surface of her quiet life, and now it had been awakened. 3 hours later, Embry was back on the floor. She had changed into fresh scrubs and returned to her station in recovery. The routine was comforting. Check vitals, adjust IVs, speak softly to patients waking from anesthesia. Simple tasks. Predictable tasks, safe tasks. But her mind was elsewhere. At 1400 hours, the call came. Hargrove was out of surgery and being moved to the ICU. The operation had been successful. Castellanos had removed the damaged spleen, repaired the liver laceration, and controlled the bleeding. Hargrove was stable. Critical, but stable. Embry felt a weight lift from her chest. She had not realized how much she had been holding until that moment. He was alive. He would recover. Her intervention had bought him the time he needed. She finished her shift and went home. Her apartment was small, clean, and almost aggressively unremarkable. White walls, minimal furniture, a few books on a shelf, no photographs, no decorations, nothing that spoke of the person who lived there or the life she had left behind. She made tea and sat by the window, watching the sun set over the bay. The water turned gold, then orange, then deep purple as the light faded. It was beautiful, peaceful, the kind of evening she used to dream about during those long nights in the desert. But tonight, the peace felt fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital administrator. "Admiral Hargrove is asking to see you when he wakes. Thought you should know." Embry stared at the message. She had known this was coming, had known that saving his life would mean facing him again. But she had hoped for more time, a few days, a week, long enough to prepare herself for whatever questions he would ask. She did not reply to the text. She just set the phone down and returned to watching the sunset. The next morning, Embry arrived at the hospital early. She checked in at the nurse's station and reviewed her patient assignments. None of them were in the ICU. None of them were Hargrove. She felt a guilty sense of relief. But at 10:00 hours, the call came. The ICU nurse needed assistance with a patient. Could Embry cover? She agreed, knowing before she even asked that it would be him. When she entered the ICU, Hargrove was awake. He looked diminished in the hospital bed, pale and weak, with tubes and wires connecting him to half a dozen machines. But his eyes were alert, and when he saw her, they sharpened with recognition. Nurse Calix, Admiral. Embry approached the bed, checking the monitors out of habit. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a building." His voice was hoarse, which I suppose I was. Embry allowed herself a small smile. "Your vitals look good. Dr. Castellanos did excellent work, so I have been told." Hargrove watched her closely. "But I have also been told that I would not have made it to the operating table if not for you." Embry adjusted the IV line, not meeting his eyes. "Dr. Fenn stabilized you. I just assisted. That is not what Dr. Fenn says. That is not what anyone says." Hargrove shifted slightly, wincing. "They say you took command of the trauma bay, that you diagnosed me with certainty and precision, that you knew exactly what was wrong before anyone else even had a chance to think." Embry said nothing. "They also say you are just a nurse, that you work in recovery, that no one even knew you had a medical background beyond basic training." Hargrove's gaze was piercing. "But that is not true, is it?" Embry finally looked at him. "What do you want me to say, Admiral? I want you to tell me who you are." "Really?" Embry pulled up a chair and sat down. She was tired of running from this. Tired of hiding. If he wanted the truth, she would give it to him. "My name is Embry Calix. I was a captain in the Naval Medical Corps. I trained at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. I specialized in trauma surgery. I deployed 3 times: Afghanistan, Iraq, and one classified location I cannot name. I performed over 200 combat surgeries. I saved a lot of lives, and I lost some too." Hargrove listened without interrupting. "After my 3rd deployment, I was offered a promotion, a teaching position, a chance to train the next generation of military surgeons. I turned it down, I submitted my resignation, and walked away. I retrained as a nurse and took a position here, in recovery, where the stakes are lower and the nights are quieter. That is who I am." "Why did you leave?" Embry looked out the window. "Because I could not carry it anymore. The weight of it. Every time I lost someone, it felt like a failure. Even when I knew I had done everything right, even when the wounds were too severe or the blood loss too great, it still felt like failure. And after a while, the failures outnumbered the successes, at least in my mind." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "How many did you lose?" Embry's throat tightened. 32. Over 3 deployments. 32 soldiers who came to my table and did not leave it. "And how many did you save?" "Over 200. Hargrove let that sink in. "You saved 200 lives, and you walked away because of 32 losses." Embry met his eyes. "Yes, because those 32 mattered just as much as the 200, maybe more, because I knew their names. I wrote letters to their families. I carried their faces with me every single day, and I could not do it anymore." Hargrove nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? I do. Hargrove's voice was softer now. I have sent men into combat. I have ordered missions that I knew might not bring everyone home, and every single loss weighs on me, every name, every face. So, yes, I understand. Embry looked down at her hands. I thought walking away would make it easier, that if I stopped operating, I would stop losing people. And for a while, it worked. But yesterday, when you were bleeding out and no one knew what to do, I could not just stand there. I could not let you die when I knew I could save you. You did save me, I know, and I do not know how I feel about that. Hargrove studied her. Do you regret it? No. Embry shook her head. I do not regret saving you. I just do not know what it means. For me, for the choice I made to walk away, it means you are still a surgeon, no matter what title you carry. Embry stood up. I should check on your dressings. Hargrove caught her wrist gently. Wait, there is something else I need to say. Embry paused, waiting. Thank you. Hargrove's voice was steady. I was wrong. In that trauma bay, I was arrogant and stubborn, and I put my rank above my life. You stopped me, you saved me, not just from my injuries, but from my own stupidity. So, thank you. Embry nodded. You are welcome, and I am sorry. For dismissing you, for treating you and the rest of the staff with disrespect. I was afraid, and I handled it poorly. Embry's expression softened. Apology accepted. She checked his dressings, made a few notes on his chart, and turned to leave. But Hargrove called after her once more. Calyx, one more thing. She stopped at the door. I am going to put in a request to have your surgical credentials fully restored, to offer you any position you want. Surgery, teaching, command, whatever you choose. Embry turned back to face him. Admiral, I appreciate that, but I am exactly where I need to be. You are wasted in recovery. I am needed in recovery. Embry's voice was firm, but kind. Not every contribution has to be loud or visible. Some of the most important work happens quietly, in the background, where no one is watching. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I respect that, but the offer stands. If you ever change your mind, I will not. But thank you. She left the ICU and returned to her station. The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm. Patients came and went, vitals were checked, medications were administered. The work was simple, repetitive, and deeply satisfying. But something had shifted. Embry could feel it. A crack in the wall she had built around herself. A reminder that the person she used to be was still there, still capable, still alive beneath the surface. And for the first time in years, she did not know if that was a good thing or a terrifying one. That night, she dreamed of the desert, of the surgical bay, of Corporal Davies and the 11 others she had saved that day. But this time, when she called the time of death, she did not walk away. She stood there, looking down at his face, and whispered the words she had never been able to say. I did everything I could. I am sorry it was not enough. And in the dream, he opened his eyes and smiled. I know. Thank you for trying. She woke with tears on her face. The apartment was dark and silent. The bay outside her window was invisible in the night. But somewhere in that darkness, she felt a weight lifting. Not gone, but lighter. Bearable. She had saved Admiral Hargrove. She had stepped back into the role she had abandoned, and she had survived it. That had to mean something. Maybe it meant she was stronger than she thought. Maybe it meant the past did not have to define her. Or maybe it just meant she was still figuring out who she was supposed to be. But for now, she was okay with not knowing. For now, it was enough to have helped, to have made a difference, to have reminded herself that she still could. And tomorrow, she would wake up and do it again. Quietly, without fanfare, exactly the way she wanted. Have you ever walked away from something you were good at because it hurt too much to continue? Share your story. And if you believe in honoring the people who carry their burdens in silence, subscribe, not for the algorithm, but because their stories matter. 6 days passed. Hargrove recovered quickly, his body responding well to treatment. The ICU released him to a private room on the 4th floor. He was still weak, still tethered to monitors, but the immediate danger had passed. He would live, he would heal, and eventually he would return to his command. During those 6 days, Embry continued her work and recovery. She moved through her shifts with the same quiet efficiency she always had. She checked vitals, administered medications, spoke softly to patients waking from surgery. The routine was steady, familiar, but something had changed beneath the surface and everyone could feel it. The staff looked at her differently now, not with suspicion, but with curiosity, with respect. The story of what had happened in the trauma bay had spread through the hospital like wildfire. A nurse who spoke like a surgeon. A woman who had taken command when no one else could. A mystery who had saved the life of a vice admiral and then returned to her station as if nothing had happened. People whispered when she passed. They asked questions she did not answer. They tried to piece together who she was from fragments and rumors. But Embry said nothing. She simply did her work and went home each night to her quiet apartment by the bay. On the morning of the 7th day, a young nurse named Marcus approached her hesitantly at the medication cart. Embry was counting pills, her movements precise and automatic. She sensed his presence but did not look up immediately. "Nurse Calix, can I ask you something?" Embry set down the pill bottle and turned to face him. "Of course." Marcus shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "In the trauma bay? When you diagnosed the Admiral, how did you know? How did you know so quickly what was wrong with him?" Embry considered the question. "Experience, pattern recognition. I have seen that presentation before. But you are a nurse." Marcus caught himself. No disrespect, but nurses do not usually make those kinds of diagnoses, not with that kind of certainty. Embry met his eyes. "I was not always a nurse." She did not elaborate. Marcus waited, hoping for more, but when nothing came, he nodded slowly. "Right. Okay. Thank you." He walked away, and Embry returned to her work. But the question stayed with her. How did you know? She had been asking herself the same thing, not about the diagnosis itself, but about the deeper knowledge, the instinct that had kicked in, without thought, the muscle memory that had taken over her hands and her voice. She had believed that part of her was gone, buried, but it had been there all along, waiting. That afternoon, Dr. Castellanos found her. She was in the break room, finishing her lunch, when he walked in and closed the door behind him. He looked older than she remembered, more tired. But his eyes were sharp, and when he looked at her, there was something in his expression she could not quite read. "Embry, we need to talk." She set down her sandwich. "I know." Castellanos sat down across from her. His hands were folded on the table, and for a long moment he said nothing, just looked at her, as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the surgeon he had once known. "When you left, I thought it was temporary. I thought you just needed time, a break, some distance from the war. I never imagined you would walk away completely." Embry met his gaze. "I needed more than distance. I needed a different life." Castellanos nodded slowly. "I tried to find you after you resigned. I called, I wrote letters. No one knew where you had gone. It was like you disappeared. I did, on purpose. Why here? Why nursing? Because it was the furthest thing from surgery I could find while still helping people." Embry's voice was calm. "I wanted to be useful. I just did not want to be the one making life and death decisions anymore." Castellanos leaned back in his chair. "You were one of the best trauma surgeons I ever trained. Do you know that? The best. You had instincts that could not be taught. You could see things others missed. You could work under pressure that would break most people, and you just threw it all away. I did not throw it away. I chose something different. You chose to hide." Embry's jaw tightened. "I chose to survive." The words hung in the air between them. Castellanos looked down at his hands. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice softer. "I heard about what you did in the trauma bay. How you diagnosed Hargrove, how you stabilized him, how you took command of a room full of doctors who did not even know who you were. I did what was necessary. You did what no one else could." Castellanos looked up at her. "And you did it perfectly. Like you had never stopped. Like the last 5 years did not even happen." Embry said nothing. "The surgery I performed on Hargrove. It went exactly the way you predicted. Splenic rupture, liver laceration, massive internal hemorrhage. If you had not intervened when you did, he would have died before I even got out of my previous case. Do you understand that? You saved his life." "I know." "So, why are you still pretending to be just a nurse?" Embry stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I am not pretending. I am a nurse. That is what I do. That is who I am now. Castellanos stood as well. That is not who you are. That is who you are hiding behind. You do not get to tell me who I am. Then who are you? Castellanos' voice rose slightly. Because the woman I trained would never have walked away. The woman I knew believed in this work, believed that saving lives mattered more than personal comfort. And now I find out she has been working in recovery for 5 years, changing bedpans and checking blood pressure when she could have been saving dozens, maybe hundreds of people. Embry's hands clenched into fists. You do not understand. Then explain it to me. Embry turned away, facing the window. The bay was visible in the distance, calm and blue under the afternoon sun. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. Not the dream this time, the reality. I lost 32 people, 32 soldiers who came to my table and did not leave it alive. I wrote letters to their families. I attended memorial services. I carried their names with me every single day. And after a while, I started to wonder if I was the problem, if I was not good enough, fast enough, skilled enough, if maybe someone else could have saved them. Castellanos shook his head. That is survivor's guilt talking. You know that. Those losses were not your fault. I know that in my head. But my heart does not believe it. Embry opened her eyes, so I walked away. Because I could not keep doing it, could not keep standing over bodies and making decisions that determined whether someone lived or died. Could not keep failing people who trusted me to save them. You did not fail them. You did everything you could. It was not enough. It never is. Castellanos' voice was gentle now. That is the nature of medicine. We do not get to save everyone. We just do our best and hope it is enough. And when it is not, we grieve. And then we keep going. Because the next person who comes through those doors deserves our best effort too. Embry turned to face him. I could not keep going. That is the difference between you and me. You are strong enough to carry it. I was not. Castellanos stepped closer. You carried it for 3 deployments. You saved over 200 lives under conditions that would have destroyed most surgeons. You are one of the strongest people I have ever known. You just convinced yourself you are not. Embry felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them away. I am happy here, doing this work, helping people in smaller ways. That should be enough for you. It is not about what is enough for me. It is about what you are capable of. And you are capable of so much more than this. Maybe I do not want to be capable of more. Maybe I just want to be okay. Castellanos studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, I will not push you. But I want you to know something. The offer I made 5 years ago still stands. If you ever want to come back, if you ever want to teach, to operate, to be who you were meant to be, the door is open. Embry nodded. Thank you. Castellanos moved toward the door, then paused. Admiral Hargrove has been asking about you. He wants to speak with you again. Privately, I know. I have been avoiding it. Why? Because I do not want what he is going to offer me. Castellanos smiled faintly. Maybe you should let him offer it anyway. Sometimes hearing something out loud helps us understand why we are saying no. He left. Embry stood alone in the break room, staring out at the bay. The water was so still today, so peaceful. Nothing like the deserts where she had spent so many months. Nothing like the chaos of the surgical bay or the weight of lives slipping away beneath her hands. She had built this peace carefully, deliberately, and she was not ready to give it up. But she also knew she could not avoid Hargrove forever. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Embry moved through her rounds, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about what Castellanos had said, about strength and capability and purpose. She thought about the 32 she had lost and the 200 she had saved. She thought about the choice she had made 5 years ago, and whether it had been the right one. By the time her shift ended, she had made a decision. She would go see Hargrove. She would hear what he had to say, and then she would explain, one final time, why she was choosing to stay exactly where she was. That evening, she went to his room. He was sitting up in bed, reading something on a tablet. When she entered, he set it down and smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and unguarded, nothing like the fury she had seen in the trauma bay. Nurse Calix. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. I was. Embry closed the door behind her, but I decided that was cowardly. Hargrove laughed, then winced and pressed a hand to his side. Careful. Laughing still hurts. Sorry? Do not be. It is good to laugh. He gestured to the chair beside his bed. Sit. Please. Embry sat. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Hargrove picked up the tablet again. I have been doing some research. About you. I hope you do not mind. I assumed you would. He turned the screen toward her. It showed her military record, her commendations, her deployments, the list of surgeries she had performed, the lives she had saved. It was all there, laid out in neat, official language that somehow failed to capture what any of it had actually felt like. Captain Embry Calix, 2 bronze stars for valor, 1 silver star for actions above and beyond the call of duty. You performed a field amputation under mortar fire. You operated for 36 hours straight during a mass casualty event. You saved the lives of 3 Marines who were trapped under debris while mortars fell around you. You were recommended for early promotion to Major. Hargrove set the tablet down. And then, you resigned. Why? Embry looked at the screen, at the summary of a life she barely recognized anymore. Because I was tired, because I was broken, because I could not do it anymore. You were one of the most decorated surgeons in the Navy. You saved 47 lives in a single deployment, 47 people who are alive today because of you, and you walked away. Yes. Why? Embry met his eyes. Because I also lost 32, and I could not stop thinking about them, could not stop seeing their faces, could not stop wondering if I had done something differently. Maybe they would have lived. So I left. I retrained. I chose a quieter life, and I do not regret it. Hargrove was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. I understand. Do you? Yes. Hargrove shifted in the bed, adjusting his position carefully. I have commanded ships. I have sent men and women into combat. I have made decisions that resulted in losses, and every single one of those losses lives with me. I remember their names, their faces, the letters I had to write to their families. So, yes, I understand what it means to carry that weight. Then you understand why I left. I do. Hargrove paused. But I also think you are wrong. About what? About walking away being the answer. Hargrove leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. You did not lose those 32 soldiers, Captain. You fought for them. You gave them every chance you could. And when their wounds were too severe or the damage too great, you did not give up. You fought until there was nothing left to fight for. That is not failure. That is heroism. It did not feel like heroism. It felt like failing. Because you cared. Because their lives mattered to you. Hargrove's voice was firm but gentle. But walking away did not erase that pain. It just meant you stopped using your gift. And the world lost one of its best surgeons. Embry shook her head. I am exactly where I need to be. Are you? Hargrove picked up the tablet again. Because from what I have seen, you are wasting your talent. You could be saving lives every day, training the next generation of surgeons, making a difference in ways that most people never will. Instead, you are checking vitals in recovery. I help people in recovery. I know you do, and that matters. But you could help so many more. Hargrove set the tablet aside. I spent my entire career believing that rank was what mattered. That authority came from the uniform I wore and the stars on my shoulder. And then you walked into that trauma bay and taught me something I should have learned decades ago. True authority does not come from rank. It comes from competence, from courage, from the willingness to act when everyone else is paralyzed by fear or protocol. Embry looked down at her hands. You have that kind of authority. You always will. Whether you are operating in a combat zone or checking blood pressure in recovery. But the question is not whether you can do this work. The question is whether you should. Whether the world can afford to lose what you are capable of giving. Embry felt something tighten in her chest. I have given enough. Have you? Hargrove's voice was quiet but insistent. Or have you just convinced yourself that walking away was easier than staying? It was not easier. It was necessary. For your survival. I understand that. But you have survived now. You have had 5 years of peace and quiet and safety. And the question you need to ask yourself is this: what comes next? Do you spend the rest of your life hiding from what you are capable of? Or do you find a way to use your gifts that does not break you? Embry stood up abruptly. Admiral, I appreciate what you are trying to do, but I have made my choice. I am not going back to surgery. I am not going back to that life. I am happy where I am. Hargrove looked at her steadily. Are you? Truly? Embry hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer was not. Was she happy, or was she just safe? Was she living, or was she hiding? She did not know anymore. I am at peace. That is enough. Hargrove nodded slowly. All right, I will respect that. But I want you to know that I am putting in a formal request to have your medical credentials fully restored, to offer you any position you want, surgery, teaching, research, command, whatever you choose. The offer will be there, waiting for when you are ready. I will not be ready. Maybe not today, maybe not this year. But one day, you might wake up and realize that you miss it, that you want to use your skills again. And when that day comes, the door will be open. Hargrove extended his hand. Thank you, Captain Calix, for saving my life and for reminding me that true competence does not need to announce itself. Embry took his hand. You are welcome. She turned to leave, but Hargrove spoke again. One more thing. She paused at the door. The people you do not see are often the ones holding everything together. I learned that from you, and I will never forget it. Embry nodded and left the room. She walked slowly through the hospital corridors, her mind churning with thoughts she could not quiet. It was late now, past the end of her shift. The halls were nearly empty, lit only by the soft glow of overhead lights. She passed rooms where patients slept, where families kept vigil, where nurses worked through the night to keep watch over the vulnerable. This was her world now, quiet, steady, safe. And for the first time, she wondered if safe was the same as right. She stopped at a window overlooking the parking lot. Below, she could see the emergency entrance, the ambulance bay, the constant flow of people moving in and out. Lives being saved, lives being lost. The endless cycle of medicine that never stopped, no matter who walked away from it. Embry pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She was so tired, not physically, emotionally. Tired of carrying the weight of that choice. Tired of defending it. Tired of wondering if she had made a mistake. A voice spoke behind her. You okay? She turned to find Soraya standing a few feet away, concern etched on her face. I am fine. You do not look fine. Soraya moved closer. You look like someone who just had a very difficult conversation. Embry managed a weak smile. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you. Soraya leaned against the wall. Want to talk about it? Not really. Fair enough. They stood in silence for a moment, then Soraya spoke again. For what it is worth, I think you are amazing. What you did for the Admiral, what you do every day in recovery, you make a difference, a real one, and I hope you know that. Thank you. But I also think, Soraya hesitated, I think you are carrying something heavy, something you have not let go of, and maybe it is time to figure out what to do with it, before it crushes you. Embry looked at her. When did you get so wise? I have been working night shifts for 6 years. You learn things in the quiet hours. Soraya squeezed her shoulder gently and walked away. Embry remained at the window, watching the emergency entrance. An ambulance pulled up, lights flashing. The doors opened. A gurney was rushed inside. And somewhere in that building, a team of doctors and nurses would fight to save whoever was on it. She used to be part of that fight. She used to be the one making the impossible decisions. And she had been good at it, better than good. But it had cost her sleep and peace and the ability to separate herself from the lives she touched. And she had walked away to protect what was left of herself. Was that wrong? Was Hargrove right? Was she hiding? She did not know, and that uncertainty felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. 3 weeks passed. Hargrove was discharged from the hospital, walking out under his own power, his uniform crisp and his posture straight. He was the Admiral again, but something in him had changed. Before he left, he stopped at the nurses' station and thanked every member of the staff individually. He shook hands. He smiled. He expressed genuine gratitude for their care. And he left an envelope for Embry. She did not open it until the end of her shift. She sat in the empty break room, alone, and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in neat, precise script. Captain Calix. You reminded me that rank is what you wear, character is what you earn. In that trauma bay, you showed me what true authority looks like. It is not loud. It is not demanding. It is simply the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what needs to be done and does it without hesitation. You saved my life, not just with your skills, but with your courage. You stopped me from making a fatal mistake, and you did it with grace and dignity. For that, I will be forever grateful. The offer I made stands, whenever you are ready. But if you choose to remain where you are, I will respect that too, because I have learned that sometimes the most important work is done in silence, by people who never ask for recognition, but who deserve it more than anyone else. With respect and gratitude, Cassian Hargrove. Embry read the letter 3 times. Each time she felt something shift inside her. Not a dramatic change, just a small loosening of the grip she had kept on herself for so long. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her locker, alongside the military commendations she had never displayed. She did not know what she felt. Proud, maybe, moved, but also deeply conflicted. Because part of her, a part she had tried to bury, wondered if Hargrove was right, wondered if she was wasting her skills, wondered if walking away had been the right choice after all. The weeks that followed were strange. Embry continued her work in recovery, but something had shifted inside her. She found herself noticing things she had not before. The way the younger nurses hesitated when faced with complex cases. The way doctors sometimes missed subtle signs that could indicate larger problems. The way patients recovered more slowly when their care was not coordinated with precision. She began offering suggestions. Quietly, diplomatically. A better angle for an IV placement. A medication adjustment that might ease pain more effectively. A warning sign in a patient's vitals that should be monitored more closely. And every time, she was right. The staff began to seek her out, to ask her opinion, to defer to her judgment even though she was technically their peer. And Embry found herself stepping into a role she had not chosen but could not deny. A teacher, a mentor, a quiet authority in a place that desperately needed one. One afternoon, she was reviewing charts at the nurses' station when a code blue was called in the ICU. She heard the announcement over the intercom and continued her work. It was not her department, not her responsibility, but something pulled at her, an instinct she could not ignore. She walked toward the ICU. The door was open. Inside, she could see the crash cart, the team working frantically, a patient whose heart had stopped. The attending physician was barking orders, but there was chaos in his voice. Panic. Embry stood in the doorway, watching, not interfering, just observing. The attending tried a second round of epinephrine. No response. He called for the defibrillator. The shock was delivered. Nothing. The heart rhythm on the monitor remained flat. Embry stepped into the room. The attending looked up, saw her, and his expression shifted to relief. Calix. Thank God. I need your eyes on this. Something is wrong and I cannot figure out what. She moved to the bedside, looked at the monitor, at the patient, at the setup, and she saw it immediately. The IV line had infiltrated. The medications were not reaching the bloodstream. They were being pumped into subcutaneous tissue. Your line is blown. You need to reestablish access now. The attending followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. How did I miss that? He turned to the team. New line, central if you can. Move. The team worked quickly. A new line was placed. Medications were pushed. And within seconds, the patient's heart began to beat again. The monitor showed a rhythm, weak but present. The room exhaled collectively. The attending looked at Embry. You just saved his life. You did. I just pointed out what you already knew. No, I did not see it. I was too focused on the monitor, on the protocols. I missed the obvious. The attending shook his head. You have a gift. You see things the rest of us do not. Embry did not respond. She simply walked out of the ICU and returned to her station. But her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the adrenaline, from the rush of being in that space again, of making a difference in the critical moment. She sat down at the nurse's station and pressed her palms flat against the desk, breathed slowly, in, out, in, out. This was the second time in a month that she had stepped into a crisis and changed the outcome. The second time she had used skills she thought she had left behind. And it felt good. Terrifying. But good. That evening, Dr. Fenn found her in the break room. He sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. Calyx. I need to ask you something. She looked up from her coffee. All right. We have a new surgical resident starting next month. Bright kid, talented, but completely inexperienced. He needs someone to teach him, someone who understands trauma, someone who can show him not just the technical skills, but the mindset, the instincts, the judgment. Fenn paused. I want that person to be you. Embry stared at him. I am a nurse. You are a surgeon. You are just choosing not to operate. But that does not mean you cannot teach. Fenn leaned forward. We need you, Calyx, not just as a nurse, as a mentor, as someone who can pass on what you know to the people who are going to be saving lives for the next 30 years. I have not been in an operating room in 5 years, and yet you diagnosed a splenic rupture in under a minute. You stabilized a dying admiral when no one else could. You just identified an infiltrated IV line that everyone else in that room missed. Fenn's voice was earnest. You have been quietly teaching every nurse and resident in this, building without even realizing it. I am just asking you to make it official. Embry was silent. The offer hung between them, heavy with possibility, with responsibility, with the weight of choices she had thought were behind her. What would that look like? Teaching, I mean. Weekly sessions, case reviews, maybe sometime in the simulation lab. You would not be operating, just sharing your knowledge, your experience, your perspective. Fenn paused. Think about it. You do not have to decide right now, but I wanted you to know the opportunity is there. He stood to leave, then turned back. You know what I think? I think you walked away from surgery because you cared too much, because every loss felt like a personal failure, and I respect that. But I also think you have something valuable to offer, something that could save lives for decades to come, not through your hands, but through the hands of everyone you teach. Fenn left. Embry sat alone in the break room, her coffee growing cold in front of her. She thought about his words, about teaching, about passing on what she knew, about finding a way to use her skills without stepping back into the operating room, without carrying the weight of life and death decisions every single day. It was a middle path, a compromise between who she had been and who she had become. And for the first time in 5 years, it felt like a possibility she could actually consider. That night, she dreamed of the desert again. But this time, it was different. She was not in the surgical bay. She was standing outside in the sun, watching a convoy roll out toward the horizon. And standing beside her was a young surgeon, newly deployed, asking questions about what to expect. And she was answering, sharing what she knew, preparing them for what was coming. She was teaching them how to survive. When she woke, the first light of dawn was filtering through her window. The bay was visible in the distance, calm and silver in the early morning light. She lay in bed for a long time, thinking about Davies, about the 32 she had lost, about the 200 she had saved, about what it meant to walk away and what it meant to come back. She could not go back to being who she was, but she could become something new. She could take what she had learned, the hard lessons bought with blood and grief and loss, and she could pass it on. She could help the next generation be better, stronger, more prepared. She could teach, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. 2 weeks later, Embry stood in front of a small classroom in the hospital's training wing. 5 surgical residents sat before her, notebooks open, pens ready. They looked young, eager, terrified, just like she had been once. She took a breath and began. My name is Embry Calyx. I am a former trauma surgeon. I served 3 deployments in combat zones. I performed over 200 surgeries under conditions most of you will never experience. I saved a lot of lives, and lost some too, and I am here to teach you not just how to operate, but how to survive it. The residents listened in silence. You are going to face impossible situations. You are going to make decisions in seconds that will determine whether someone lives or dies. And sometimes, no matter what you do, no matter how skilled you are or how hard you try, you are going to lose someone. And when that happens, it is going to feel like failure. It is going to hurt. and you are going to wonder if you made the right choice." She paused, meeting each of their eyes. "But here is what I want you to understand. The fact that it hurts means you care, and caring is what makes you a good doctor. So, do not let the losses destroy you. Learn from them. Carry them. Honor them. But do not let them stop you from showing up for the next patient, because they deserve your best effort too." The residents were leaning forward now, completely focused. "You are going to learn technical skills, surgical techniques, protocols, but what I am here to teach you is judgment, instinct, the ability to see what others miss, the courage to act when everyone else is frozen, and the humility to ask for help when you need it." She spent the next hour walking them through case studies, real situations she had faced in the field. She described the injuries, the decisions she made, the outcomes, both good and bad. She was honest about the mistakes, about the times she had been wrong, about the moments when she had doubted herself. And the residents listened with rapt attention, because she was not lecturing them. She was sharing her truth, the raw, unfiltered reality of what it meant to hold lives in your hands. When the session ended, one of the residents, a young woman named Dr. Isla Brennan, approached her hesitantly. "Nurse Calix, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you stop? Operating, I mean. If you were that good, why did you walk away?" Embry considered the question. She had been asked it many times in the past weeks, and each time her answer had been the same. But this time, standing in front of someone who was just beginning their journey, she felt the need to be completely honest. "I stopped because I could not carry it anymore. The weight of the losses, the fear that I would make a mistake, the knowledge that no matter how good I was, sometimes it would not be enough. So I chose a quieter life, a safer one. And for a long time, that was what I needed, but not anymore." Embry smiled. "I am still figuring that out." Isla nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for sharing that. It helps to know that even the best surgeons struggle with it. Everyone struggles with it. The ones who say they do not are either lying or dangerous." Isla laughed and walked away. Embry packed up her materials and left the training wing. She felt lighter somehow, like she had set down a burden she had been carrying for too long. Teaching felt right. It felt like a way to honor the past without being consumed by it, a way to make a difference without sacrificing herself in the process. Over the following weeks, Embry's role evolved. She continued working in recovery, but she also began spending more time in the training wing. She ran simulation exercises. She reviewed difficult cases with residents. She offered guidance to nurses who were struggling with complex patients. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she began to heal. The nightmares did not disappear entirely, but they became less frequent. The guilt did not vanish, but it became more bearable. She was learning to carry the weight of her past without letting it crush her present. One afternoon, 3 months after Hargrove's discharge, Embry was walking through the hospital corridors when she saw him. He was in civilian clothes, standing at the information desk, asking for directions. He looked healthy, strong, completely recovered. He saw her at the same moment. His face lit up with recognition. Nurse Calix, Admiral. She walked over to him. "What brings you back?" "A follow-up appointment with Dr. Castellanos, making sure everything is still healing properly." Hargrove smiled. "And I wanted to see you, to thank you again, and to see if you had reconsidered my offer. I have not gone back to surgery. If that is what you are asking, I figured as much. But I hear you are teaching now, training residents, sharing your knowledge." Embry was surprised. "How did you hear that?" "I have my sources." Hargrove's eyes twinkled. "And I am told you are exceptional at it, that the residents hang on your every word, that you are making them better doctors. I am trying. You are succeeding." Hargrove placed a hand on her shoulder. "I told you that you had a gift. I am glad you found a way to use it that works for you. Thank you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Hargrove spoke again. "You taught me something in that trauma bay, something I needed to learn. That true authority does not come from rank or title. It comes from competence and courage, and I carry that lesson with me every day." Embry felt her throat tighten. "I am glad I could help. You did more than help. You changed the way I see the world, the way I lead, the way I treat the people under my command." Hargrove extended his hand. "So thank you for saving my life and for teaching me how to be a better officer." Embry shook his hand. "You are welcome, Admiral." Hargrove left for his appointment. Embry continued through the corridors, her steps lighter than they had been in years. She passed the trauma bay where it had all begun. The room was empty now, quiet and clean, waiting for the next emergency. She paused at the doorway, remembered the chaos, the fear. The moment when she had stepped forward and reclaimed a part of herself she thought was lost forever. It had been terrifying, but it had also been necessary, because it had shown her that she was not broken, that she had not lost her skills or her instincts. She had just needed to find a different way to use them, and she had. Months continued to pass. Embry's teaching expanded. She was asked to lead more sessions, to consult on difficult cases, to mentor not just residents but attending physicians who wanted to sharpen their instincts. Her reputation grew, not as the nurse who used to be a surgeon, but as the teacher who could help others see what they were missing. She began writing too, case studies, clinical articles, essays on trauma care and decision-making under pressure. Her work was published in medical journals, read by surgeons across the country, and slowly, almost without intending to, she became a voice in her field again. But she never went back to the operating room. She never picked up a scalpel. She had drawn that line for herself, and she kept it, because she knew her limits, knew what she could handle and what she could not. And that was okay, because she was making a difference in other ways, ways that felt sustainable, ways that did not drain her or break her or leave her staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, haunted by the faces of the dead. One evening, nearly a year after Hargrove's accident, Embry stood in the hospital parking lot, looking up at the building. Lights glowed in windows throughout the structure, lives being saved, lives being cared for. The endless work of medicine continuing without pause. She thought about the journey she had taken, from combat surgeon to nurse to teacher, from someone who carried unbearable weight to someone who had learned to share it, from someone who walked away to someone who found a way back. It had not been a straight path. It had been messy and painful and full of doubt, but it had led her here, to a place where she could use her gifts without sacrificing herself, where she could help others without being destroyed by the responsibility. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Soraya walked out of the building and joined her. Long day, always. Embry smiled, but a good one. They walked together toward their cars. The evening air was cool and fresh. The bay was visible in the distance, dark and calm under the emerging stars. "You know what I realized?" Soraya said. "When I first met you, I thought you were just quiet, reserved. But you were not quiet. You were careful. You were protecting something inside yourself, something that hurt too much to expose." Embry glanced at her. "And now? Now I think you have found a way to let it breathe, to use it without letting it consume you." Soraya smiled. "I am proud of you. Thank you. That means more than you know." They reached their cars and said their goodbyes. Embry drove home slowly, taking the long route along the coast. The ocean stretched out beside her, infinite and unchanging. Waves rolled in steady rhythm, a heartbeat that never stopped. When she reached her apartment, she made tea and sat by the window. The view was the same as always. The bay, the lights, the quiet evening, settling over the water. But she saw it differently now. Not as an escape, but as a foundation. A place of peace she had built for herself and could return to whenever she needed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Fenn. "Tomorrow's teaching session. Would you be willing to demonstrate ultrasound-guided central line placement? The residents could really benefit from your expertise." She smiled and typed her reply. "Of course. See you at 0800. She set the phone down and returned to the window. Somewhere in the city, surgical residents were studying, preparing, learning, and tomorrow she would teach them, share what she knew, help them become better doctors. That was her purpose now. Not to save lives directly, but to train the people who would, to pass on the lessons she had learned so that others would not have to learn them the hard way, to be the mentor she wished she had when she was young and terrified and making life or death decisions in the desert. It was not the life she had imagined, but it was the life she had chosen, and it was good. Embry closed her eyes and let herself feel grateful for the journey, for the healing, for the chance to make a difference in a way that honored both who she had been and who she had become. The people you do not see are often the ones holding everything together. Hargrove had written that, and he was right. She had spent years being invisible, working quietly, helping without recognition, and there was power in that, dignity, purpose. But now she was visible again, just in a different way, not as the surgeon who saved 200 lives, but as the teacher who would help thousands of others do the same. And that legacy felt like something worth building, something worth living for. She opened her eyes and looked out at the bay one more time. The water was still. The night was peaceful. And for the first time in years, Embry felt completely at home in her own skin. She had walked away from the operating room, but she had not walked away from medicine. She had just found a different path, a quieter one, a path that allowed her to heal while still helping others. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the title, not the recognition, not the uniform or the medals or the commendations. Just the simple knowledge that she was making a difference, that she was needed, that her life had purpose. And that was enough. That was everything. If you know someone who carries their strength quietly, who helps without asking for recognition, who makes a difference in ways the world does not always see, honor them, speak their name, tell their story, because the people who do not demand attention are often the ones who deserve it most. And if this story reminded you that real strength is not about being the loudest voice in the room, but the steadiest hand when everything falls apart, consider subscribing. These are the stories that matter, the ones about people who choose service over glory, who choose healing over recognition, who choose to show up day after day, whether anyone is watching or not.
You know what I keep coming back to after this story? It's not the dramatic moment in the trauma bay or even the reveal of who Embry really was. What stays with me is something quieter. It's the image of her sitting in that break room, hands shaking after she saved his life. That moment when the adrenaline faded and she was left alone with what she had just done. Because she didn't want to be that person anymore. She had built an entire life around not being that person. And in one morning, all of it came rushing back. I think what makes this uncomfortable to sit with is how much it costs to walk away from something you're really good at. We talk about finding your purpose, following your passion, using your gifts, but we don't talk enough about what happens when your gift breaks you. When the thing you're best at is also the thing that hurts you most. Embry saved over 200 lives. That should feel like triumph. But she also lost 32. And those 32 mattered more to her than anything else. That's what I can't stop thinking about. There's a moment in this story that I think reveals everything. It's not when Embry takes over the trauma bay. It's later, when Hargrove wakes up and asks to see her, and she avoids him for days. Think about that. She saved his life. She proved her competence in the most dramatic way possible. She should feel vindicated, right? Proud, even. But instead, she's avoiding the conversation because she knows what's coming. She knows he's going to offer her everything she walked away from. Recognition, respect, a return to surgery. And she's going to have to say no. Again. That moment matters because it shows us something we don't see enough. Saying no to an opportunity doesn't always mean you're afraid or incapable. Sometimes it means you know yourself well enough to understand what you can and cannot carry. Embry wasn't hiding in that avoidance. She was protecting something she had worked very hard to build, a life where she could help people without being destroyed by the responsibility. And I think that's deeply human. The struggle between who you used to be and who you need to become. Between what others expect of you and what you know you can actually sustain. This story is really about two different kinds of authority. Hargrove had the kind that announces itself, rank, uniform, the power to give orders and expect obedience. That's visible authority, the kind we're trained to recognize and respect. But Embry had something else. She had earned authority, the kind that comes from experience, from competence, from having faced impossible situations and survived them. And the fascinating thing is, she never used it. She never announced it. She just carried it quietly, invisible to everyone around her until the moment it was absolutely necessary. What this reveals is how often we mistake volume for value. We assume the loudest voice in the room is the most important one. We defer to titles and positions and external markers of power. But the people who actually hold things together are often the ones we don't see, the ones who don't demand recognition, who do essential work without fanfare. And there's something else here about how we treat people who walk away. We saw it in how Castellanos reacted, how Hargrove tried to convince her to return. There's this assumption that if you're good at something, you owe it to the world to keep doing it. But that ignores the cost. It ignores what it takes out of a person to operate at that level day after day, carrying the weight of life and death decisions. Embry didn't owe anyone her trauma. She didn't owe the world her breakdown. She had the right to choose a quieter life, even if others saw it as waste. A lot of people watching this have lived some version of this story. Maybe you weren't a combat surgeon. Maybe you didn't save an admiral's life. But you've been underestimated. You've had someone dismiss you based on your title, your appearance, your position. You've been the person in the room with the most knowledge but the least authority. And you know what that silence feels like. When you have the answer but no one's asking you for it. Or maybe you're on the other side of this. Maybe you've been Embry in a different way. You've walked away from something you were really good at because it was costing you too much. And people didn't understand. They saw it as giving up, as wasting potential, as failure, when really it was survival. It was choosing yourself over their expectations. You don't need a military background to understand what it feels like to carry weight no one else can see, to smile and function and show up every day while holding grief or trauma or loss that would surprise anyone who thought they knew you. That's the universal part of this. The hidden depths, the quiet strength, the decision to keep going in a way that actually works for you, even when it disappoints others. So I'm curious what moment stayed with you most. Was it the confrontation in the trauma bay? The conversation with Hargrove where she explained why she left? Or was it something quieter, like her sitting alone in that break room, trying to process what she had just stepped back into? And here's the harder question. Do you think she made the right choice? Walking away from surgery, I mean. Choosing teaching over operating. Choosing peace over purpose in a way. Or do you think Hargrove and Castellanos were right, that she was wasting her gift? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. I think it depends entirely on what you believe we owe ourselves versus what we owe others, and that's different for everyone. If this story made you think about someone in your life who carries their strength quietly, someone who doesn't ask for recognition but probably deserves it more than anyone else, leave a comment. Share their name if you want, or just acknowledge them silently. Either way, they matter. And if you found something valuable in this, in sitting with a story that doesn't have easy answers, that asks you to think about dignity and respect, and the cost of competence, then maybe this is the kind of content you'd want to see more of. If that's true, subscribing helps, but only if it resonates, only if it matters to you. Thank you for staying with this story, for thinking about it, for caring about people like Embry, whose worth isn't always visible but is always there.